65-year-old animal lover Sherry Sweeter was taking an evening walk down this rather narrow road. She reached somewhere around this area where she may have heard or saw what was to be her fate, a pack of at least 16 displaced dogs. The pack of dogs eventually caught up to Sweeter, tearing her from limb to limb, from head to toe. Sometime later, her husband, Lothar Sweeter, a retired professor, had gone out to search for her. He met up with a pack of dogs who had already tasted blood and apparently wanted to taste more. He too was knocked off his feet by the wild pack and killed within minutes. Later the next day, paramedics arrived at the scene and found the suspected attacker standing guard. 16 dogs suspected to be involved were rounded up and euthanized. 26-year-old Michael Anthony Hardy died in July 2008 of acute asphyxiation while being attacked by a pack of dogs. Detective Sergeant Leith Phillips told the coroner there was not an ounce of flesh from his knee to his hip on one leg, and the deceased, Mr. Hardy, had lost part of his scrotum. An autopsy showed that Mr. Hardy had a blood alcohol level of 0.224% and had hundreds of abrasions all over his body. 47-year-old Robert James Rowe was attacked at the same camp a month later. The coroner had heard he died from a heart attack, and although there were severe injuries to his skin and limbs, there was no evidence to indicate those injuries occurred prior to his death. It is very clear that his body was, shortly after his death, attacked and eaten by dogs. This sort of behavior from dogs, domestic or feral, is very unusual. The feral dog epidemic in Moscow has also become very apparent. In appearance, most feral dogs are difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish from domestic dogs. Like domestic dogs, feral dogs manifest themselves in a variety of shapes, sizes, colors, and even breeds. German Shepherds, Doberman Pinschers, and Collies as breeds often become ferals. Most feral dogs today are descendants of domestic dogs gone wild, and they often appear similar to dog breeds that are locally common. The primary feature that distinguishes feral from domestic dogs is the degree of reliance or dependence on humans, and in some respect their behavior towards people. Feral dogs survive and reproduce independently of human intervention or assistance. Feral dogs are usually secretive and wary of people. Thus they are active during dusk, dawn, and at night, much like other wild canids. They often travel in packs or groups and may have rendezvous sites like wolves. Travel routes to and from the gathering or den sites may be well defined. Food scraps and other evidence of concentrated activity may be observed at gathering sites. Feral dogs are the most widespread of the wild canids. They may occur wherever people are present and permit dogs to roam free wherever people abandon unwanted dogs. Feral dogs probably occur in 50 states, Canada, Central and South America. They are also in Europe, Australia, Africa, and several remote ocean islands, such as the Galapagos. Like coyotes, feral dogs have Catholic diets and are best described as opportunistic feeders. They can be efficient predators, preying on small and large animals, including domestic livestock. Many rely on road-killed animals, crippled waterfowl, green vegetation, berries, and other fruit. Feral dogs are highly adaptable social carnivores. Most are about the size of a coyote or slightly larger. Many breeds of dogs are capable of existing in the wild, but after a few generations of uncontrolled breeding, a generalized mongrel tends to develop. Often, it has a German Shepherd or Husky-like appearance. Livestock and poultry can be victims of harassment, injury, and death from both domestic and feral dogs. Distinguishing between livestock killed by domestic or feral dogs and that killed by coyotes may be difficult since the mode of attack can be similar. Coyotes usually attack an animal in the throat. Domestic dogs are relatively indiscriminate in how and where they attack. Sometimes, however, dogs kill the way coyotes do. And young and inexperienced coyotes may attack any part of the body of their prey as dogs would. The survival of feral dogs depends on their ability to secure food. Therefore, feral dogs are usually adept predators. Unlike most domestic dogs, feral dogs rely on their prey for food. When domestic dogs attack domestic animals, they may injure or kill several, but seldom do they consume their victims. Rather, they leave the impression that they were involved in a vicious play rather than an attempt to obtain food. The most diagnostic characteristic of these injuries caused by dogs is usually by slashing and biting of the prey and animals over much of their bodies. Feral dogs commonly kill house cats, and they may injure or kill domestic dogs. In areas that humans may not have hunted or trapped feral dogs, these dogs may or may not have developed a fear of humans. And in those instances, such dogs may attack people, especially children. This can be a serious problem in areas where feral dogs feed at or live around garbage dumps near human dwellings. Such situations occur frequently around small, remote towns. One of those small, remote towns was Lexington, Georgia.
In the spotlight tonight, the real story behind a horrific dog attack in rural Georgia. 16 dogs, 5 of them puppies, put to death because they killed a beautiful, animal-loving couple. These dogs were captured, the ones you're looking at right there, and then killed after they mauled a retired professor and his wife last week. And the dogs were domesticated animals, pets, that appear to have gone feral because they'd been abandoned by their original caretaker. He reportedly fell on hard times and moved away from the area. Now, although some neighbors fed them from time to time, the animals were essentially left to fend for themselves outdoors day in, day out. Several of the dogs infested with maggots when they were caught. This gut-wrenching tragedy was 110% preventable. So who's really to blame? Joining me now, Jane Garrison, animal welfare expert who has done many abandoned pet rescues. I've videotaped her on several occasions. Jane, I call this an extreme case of human error. 2 people, wonderful people, who leave behind a dozen pets of their own and 16 dogs who were put in an impossible situation, all dead. What could have been done to prevent this?
Well, first of all, the dogs should have never been abandoned. It is completely wrong and illegal to abandon an animal. People should not just move away and leave their animals to fend for themselves. In addition, none of these dogs were spayed or neutered, and a dog who is not spayed or neutered is more likely to attack, which is one of the many reasons that communities should be passing mandatory spay-neuter laws.
And they were having puppies, so the 5 puppies get put to sleep just as part of the group. Who knows whether those puppies were involved in the mauling situation or not? Now, here's a very disturbing statistic. The Humane Society says 6 to 8 million dogs and cats end up in shelters every year. Of those, 3 to 4 million are euthanized, a fancy way of saying killed. Jane, some people say hard economic times have forced them to abandon their companion animals, but even rich people often treat animals as disposable objects. So what role do breeders play in this pet overpopulation crisis in America today?
Oh, well, breeders are the #1 reason that so many dogs are being killed. We need to stop breeding more animals and concentrate on finding homes for the animals who are sitting on death row in shelters. And we all can help stop the killing by boycotting breeders and pet stores. Jane, 30 to 40% of dogs in shelters are purebreds. So people can get any dog they want by going to their local shelter or by visiting websites like adoptapet.com.
Yeah, and if people weren't buying so many dogs and breeders weren't making money off of breeding and selling dogs, there'd be fewer dogs in the shelters. Then maybe this poor man who had fallen on hard times wouldn't have felt obligated to leave his dogs in the country to fend for themselves. He could have had them adopted by somebody because there'd be homes available.
Exactly. It's a vicious circle. We need to stop supporting breeders, stop supporting pet stores, and we need to spay and neuter our own animals, and we never, ever abandon an animal to fend for themselves. It's just not right.
Yeah, and it also seemed that this was sort of a hoarding situation in the sense that this was too many dogs for one person to have and then abandon them.
Exactly, and dogs act differently when they're in packs. We saw this when I was rescuing animals in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. You saw Cocker Spaniels and Chihuahuas and all these little dogs joining up and becoming packs. They act differently in packs, so we need to stop them roaming free, spay, neuter them.
Boycotting pet stores and dog breeders will not fix this problem. So far in America, there are no pet stores that sell only dogs. So the statement that Mrs. Garrison made is 100% flawed. Until the day comes where every pet store in America, or Moscow for that matter, sell dogs only, and all other pets are non-existent, this simply isn't an option, but rather a broad, reckless, and premature action to take, and statement to make. The feral dogs in Moscow are just that, feral dogs, strays. They're not rabid, they're not crazy, they're not of a significant threat. They're starving, homeless dogs, living the only way they know how. Survival of the fittest. The mainstream media, particularly in the United States, does a scrupulous job of portraying the dog of their choice as the most dangerous, the most reckless, and the most unpredictable. In the 1980s, German Shepherds were the breed of choice, with movies, television, and news portraying them as natural-born killers. In the 1990s, it was a mixture of Doberman Pinschers and Rottweilers that were the current threat and could not be trusted. Since around 2000, the present pit bulls have been the dogs that need to be watched. The dogs that would turn on their owners without hesitation or provocation. But the fact of the matter is, any dogs raised in an unhealthy environment where they are subject to beatings, fights, and other mind-altering injunctions will behave differently. The type of dog is irrelevant. Judging a dog's aggressiveness by its breed is somewhat the same thing as profiling a human by their race. This is the propaganda in American media.